when I first heard about the phrase like, if you believe in God, you will be saved, I wasn't quite sure about it. In your mind, you cannot understand what it means by itself. And when I thought like that, it was probably when I was in high school days. But when I read Pensée of Pascal, I knew there's something beyond that I don't comprehend. So over many years, and I come to the point that whatever that was said, if you believe in God, you'll be saved, it makes sense. And I laugh because it doesn't make sense in your logic. But I was so fascinated by Saichi, Myokonin. So let me first talk about that. He said, I am a happy man indeed. I visit the Pure Land, which may mean heaven, as often as I like. I'm there and I'm back, I'm there and back, I'm there and I'm back. So he goes to the Pure Land and he goes back to the world. And he says, Namuamidabutsu, Namuamidabutsu. That means he would let go of himself for the vow of Amida. Amida would save. How would I understand that is beyond the logic? But the other phrase that I mentioned was from the Meister Eckhart. In his writing, he said, if you suffer for God's sake and for God alone, that suffering does not hurt. And it's not hard to bear, for God takes the burden of it. Basically, Shin Buddhism and Christianity, at least the way Meister Eckhart mentioned, had the same idea. And why am I talking about this illogical thing? Because it's illogical in human mind, but it makes sense if you go through this religious transformation. So let me start from the simple example. I was involved in the continuous improvement, coming up with the idea in the company for people to be involved. And one simple saying is that if you get used to coming up with the idea, and I have applied and got many patents too, it's the same process. The situation is like the answer or idea is like coming from the other side, from somewhere. Because it's not in your mind to find, but it's somewhere else. So it points there as the filter or blockage in the mind, and mind itself has a constraint. You just play with the words and the logic, manipulate, but it's within the human mind, and there are more things much beyond the human mind. That's what I talked about, the two universes. One is the universe of the mind, and the other universe incorporate the whole of the universe, how things are happening. Essentially, that represents God, if you like the term. But I keep using this term, the law of nature, because the law of nature is manifesting. And we can see some portion of it, our scientific research and so forth, but there are a lot we don't know. So if you rely on the lot you don't know, which represent God or the Amida Buddha in case of Saichi, and if you really believe it, Amida would save you, he make that phrase I talked about, the happy man. And the other video I mentioned about Amida or the Saichi, but also related to breathing. It's also interesting and yet similar to the point of those phrases of the God alone can save you, and if you believe it. And why is that? Because breathing is a natural sensation, natural process that accompanies the sensation, and that's nature's way. And if you focus, you relate to the nature. You connect to the nature. That's the essence of it. Because if you connect to the nature's way, then you open up the possibility for nature to take place. The nature is the source of the miracle that we live here, breathe, and the breathing is one symptom the nature is doing. We may think in our mind we do the breathing, but when we're sleeping, breathing takes place on its own. So without relying on the other power, in this case, nature's way of breathing that happens by itself, we cannot live. So it's natural to go beyond the mind to rely on what's nature's way. So that's the obvious thing, and I mentioned that in the previous video, taken care of. Therefore, there was that poem that I mentioned early on. So in Shin Buddhism, they talk about don't go use your brain and mind, self-power, but rely on the other power, Amida power, the power of the nature. So you don't need to do lots of exercise, discipline, chanting, or reading sutra. Then there's just one sweep of change that can take place. It may take time to get to the state, but that's the awakening and the realization. So Shin Buddhism says you don't need to cut the delusion. You shouldn't try it. Without trying it, you find the Nirvana or the Pure Land. So the point that Saichi was talking about, he goes in and out of the Pure Land. And to me that's very interesting, and I can relate to that. And here's the phrase that triggered me to think like it. So in the other poem he said, in my house there's a devil, two of them. One of them is his wife, and the other one is himself. So he realized that they are devils. And what it means is that, well, he realized there's a devil, but this devil himself can go to the Pure Land. So that's the point of in and out of the Pure Land. So he has the awareness of his delusion and the horn that he talked about, that he needed to have a horn in his painting when someone wanted to have a painting of him, because he's not just a wonderful person, he's got this horn in his head. Reason being, it's a delusional thought that pops up. That's why he called himself and his wife devils. And I can relate to my living. There are lots of devils out, but there are lots of devils inside of me. But I can also see me going to the Pure Land. So that the original poem that I talked about, in and out of Pure Land, is a very realistic situation. He also talked about the repentance turn into joy, and joy going to repentance. And the video I mentioned was about the breathing. Just notice the breathing, in and out. In breathing, the air comes in, Amida Buddha comes in, and out the breathing, the delusion goes out. And that was the main point of the video I mentioned about the breathing, how wonderful it is. So this talk is lots of gibberish perhaps, and the religion can be seen something you shouldn't trust. But if it works, if you follow the law of nature and live with it, you may find this awakening, which nobody can understand by using the logic. In my case too, when I had the awakening, I was focused on breathing and inner body sensation. When I really become one with that, that's when the opening, the awakening took place. My body was shaking and jumping around, and all the energy, wak sense, is going through my whole body, and it became my body like empty, vast emptiness. And that's the point I shared in the other video too about the koku, empty sky of Saichi as well as Joshu. So this may sound like a ridiculous discussion, but if you know that so many millions and billions of people in the past have suffered to go through, to come to the Pure Land or heaven or out of suffering, we may find at the core of our being, right where we breathe or feel internal sensation, that's where we may find the solution for the suffering, that the nature's way is the way to go. In other words, God's way, if you like the term. Thank you. Or God's way, or Amida Buddha's way, because they're ready to save you. Thank you.